I found starving kits and had to help. Now their mother calls me protector. The storm had rolled through the forest like an angry god the night before. By morning, the world was hushed and dripping, every leaf and blade of grass still trembling from the rain. I had gone out early, my boots sinking into the soft mud, hoping to check the fences along the north edge of my property. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I thought at first it was the wind. A whimper. Then another. Froze. It came again, from near the line of old pines that bordered the creek. I pushed through the wet underbrush, following the small cries until I found a hollow log half buried under fallen leaves. Inside, curled together like shivering shadows, were 3 tiny fox kits. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, thin, trembling, their bellies sunken. Their fur was matted, and one of them had a scrape along its hind leg. My first thought was that the mother must have been killed in the storm or driven away by hunger. "Hey there, little ones," I murmured, kneeling down. They blinked up at me with glazed eyes, too weak even to hiss. I hesitated. Wild animals were supposed to be left to nature's course, but I couldn't just walk away. The temperature was dropping again, and they wouldn't last another night. I slipped off my jacket, gently scooped them up, and carried them home. Inside, I lined a box with old towels and set them near the wood stove. They huddled together, whimpering softly. I made a quick trip to the barn, found an eyedropper, and warmed some milk. Not ideal, but all I had until I could drive to town for the proper formula. As the warmth filled the cabin, so did a kind of quiet peace. I watched them drink, one by one, their tiny bodies trembling less with each drop. For the first time since my wife passed 2 winters ago, the cabin didn't feel entirely empty. I called the local wildlife rescue, but the line was down from the storm. So, for that night, and as it turned out for many nights after, they were my responsibility. By the end of the week, the kits had begun to recover. I named them Ember, Ash, and Flint. Ember, the smallest, was the boldest. Always the first to climb out of the box, to nibble at my bootlaces, to stare at me with curious golden eyes. I built them a small enclosure behind the cabin, close to the forest edge, so they could get used to the scents and sounds of the wild again. Every morning I'd bring them food, boiled chicken mixed with milk, and every evening I'd sit nearby, reading aloud just to keep them used to a calm human voice. Then one night I woke to the sound of scratching on the door. Not frantic, just steady, deliberate. When I opened it, the cold air rushed in, carrying a scent both wild and earthy. A full-grown vixen stood there, her coat gleaming red even in the moonlight, her eyes bright and watchful. She didn't growl, didn't run. She just stared at me and then past me, toward the faint sounds of her kits stirring in their enclosure. My heart pounded. It had to be their mother. I stepped aside slowly, leaving the door open. She padded past me, light as mist, and went straight to the enclosure. The kits squeaked and pressed themselves against the mesh, their tiny bodies trembling with recognition. The vixen pressed her nose to the wire, whining softly. It was a sound full of relief and pain. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the porch, watching them through the dim lantern light. The mother circled the enclosure again and again, as if testing whether it was safe. When dawn came, she was still there. Over the next few nights, she returned. Each time I left out food, meat scraps, bits of cooked chicken, and each time she accepted them cautiously. Sometimes she'd vanish into the trees before I could even blink. Other times she'd sit a few yards away, watching me with unblinking eyes. It became a ritual. I'd leave food for both her and the kits, and she, in return, allowed me to stay close, closer than any wild creature ever should. Weeks passed. The kits grew strong and restless. Ember was the first to leap over the enclosure fence one morning, landing clumsily but proudly on the other side. Ash and Flint followed soon after. I knew then it was time. That evening I opened the gate and stepped back. The three of them trotted out hesitantly, sniffing the air, their mother waiting just beyond the tree line. She gave a low bark, a command maybe, and they bounded toward her. I stood there, feeling both proud and hollow, as they vanished into the forest together. Winter came early that year. The snow fell thick and heavy, covering the cabin roof and bending the pine branches low. I found myself still leaving scraps of food near the tree line, though I told myself it was pointless. They were wild now. They belonged to the forest. But one night while I was stoking the fire, I heard a sound outside, a soft paw step followed by another. When I opened the door, she was there again, the vixen, her fur dusted with snow. Behind her, half hidden in the shadows, were the kits, nearly grown. She approached slowly, head low, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Then she did something that froze me where I stood. She bowed her head. Just once. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. And then, as quickly as they had come, they were gone again, disappearing into the white silence of the woods. I watched until the last trace of them vanished. From that night on, I never saw them up close again. But sometimes when I walked the forest paths at dawn, I'd find tracks near the cabin door, neat and small and familiar. The forest had given me a name, I realized. Not friend, not keeper, but protector. And that was enough. The winter deepened, and the forest grew silent beneath its white shroud. Weeks passed without a sign of the vixen or her kits. I told myself they'd moved deeper into the woods, found safer dens, wilder places where the scent of humans didn't reach. Still, each morning I'd step onto the porch and look toward the trees, listening. One night, as snow whispered against the windows, I heard soft movement outside, the delicate crunch of paws on fresh snow. I opened the door slowly, breath misting in the cold. She was there. The vixen stood a few feet away, her coat glowing copper beneath the moonlight. Behind her, the three kits, now grown, sleek and strong, waited in the shadows. For a long, breathless moment, none of us moved. The wind curled between us like a living thing. Then she stepped forward. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could see her eyes. Sharp, gold, and filled with something I couldn't name. She lowered her head once, a slow and deliberate gesture, before turning back toward the woods. Her kits followed, their tails brushing the snow, silent as ghosts. When the forest swallowed them again, I stood there for a long time, the door still open, the cold creeping in. A strange warmth filled my chest. Part pride, part grief, part something older, deeper. They weren't mine to keep. They never had been. But they remembered. Since then, I've found their tracks near my porch each winter. Small circles in the snow. Signs that I'm still watched, still trusted. The forest doesn't speak in words, but I know what she called me that night. What she still calls me when the wind moves through the pines. Protector.